Imagine you are a German soldier listening to the radio in your barracks somewhere in occupied France, 1943. You tune past the obvious Allied propaganda stations, the ones that announce themselves as British or American broadcasts. You know those are the enemy, trying to demoralize you. But then you find a different station. This one speaks perfect German with a Berlin accent. It plays German music you recognize from home. The announcer sounds like he could be your neighbor, your uncle, someone you grew up with. He talks about German military matters with insider knowledge that only someone in the Wehrmacht would possess. He mentions officers by name, references specific units, discusses internal military politics with casual familiarity. And then he says something that makes your blood run cold. He mentions your division, your commanding officer, a recent incident that was supposed to be classified. How does he know these things? Is this an official German military broadcast? But the things he is saying, the criticisms of Nazi leadership, the suggestions that the war is being lost through incompetence and corruption, these cannot be official. You realize with growing horror that this station is somehow both German and not German. It sounds like your own side, but it is saying things that could get you executed for listening to it. And you cannot stop listening because every word rings true in ways the obvious propaganda never does. This station was called Soldatensender Calais, Soldiers Radio Calais, and it was the most feared propaganda weapon the British created during World War II. Adolf Hitler personally ordered its destruction. The Gestapo hunted for its location. German counterintelligence devoted enormous resources to stopping it. But they never succeeded because the station existed in a shadow world between truth and lies, between German authenticity and British psychological warfare. Welcome to Cipher Tales, where we decode the hidden intersections of World War II propaganda and espionage. Today we are revealing the extraordinary story of the black propaganda radio station that terrified Hitler and undermined the Nazi war machine from within. The broadcast begins now. Let us decode it. Act 1. The Birth of Black Radio. Understanding Black Propaganda. Before we can understand Soldatensender Calais, we must understand the concept of black propaganda. During World War II, propaganda operations were classified into three categories based on their apparent source. White propaganda openly identified its source. When the BBC broadcast to occupied Europe, everyone knew it was the British Broadcasting Corporation speaking for the British government. When Radio Berlin broadcast, listeners knew it was Nazi Germany's official voice. White propaganda made no attempt to hide who was speaking. Gray propaganda obscured or did not clearly identify its source. Leaflets might be dropped without indicating which side produced them. Radio broadcasts might claim to be unofficial or independent when they were actually government operations. The source was ambiguous or unclear. Black propaganda deliberately misrepresented its source. It pretended to be something it was not. A British operation would claim to be German. An American broadcast would present itself as a dissident group within enemy territory. Black propaganda depended on deception about its very nature and origin. Soldatensender Calais was pure black propaganda. It claimed to be an underground German military radio station, operated by dissident Wehrmacht officers who opposed Nazi leadership while remaining loyal to Germany. In reality, it was a British operation run by the political warfare executive, broadcast from England, and designed to undermine German military morale and cohesion from within. The genius of black propaganda was that it could say things white propaganda never could. The BBC telling German soldiers their leaders were incompetent would be dismissed as enemy propaganda. But a supposedly German military voice making the same criticisms would be taken seriously because it came from within their own camp. The man behind the microphone. The creator and driving force behind Soldatensender Calais was Sefton Delmer, one of the most remarkable and controversial figures in British intelligence during World War II. Delmer was born in Berlin in 1904 to British parents, growing up fluent in German and deeply familiar with German culture. He became a journalist for the Daily Express in the 1920s and 30s, covering German affairs during the Weimar Republic and the Nazi rise to power. He interviewed Hitler multiple times and understood Nazi propaganda methods intimately. When war broke out, British intelligence recruited Delmer specifically for his German expertise. He initially worked on white propaganda broadcasts, but he found this work frustrating. Speaking as an obvious Englishman telling Germans what to think seemed ineffective to him. He believed propaganda needed to be more subtle, more insidious, more believable. Delmer proposed creating black propaganda radio stations that would pretend to be German operations, speaking to German audiences in ways that would resonate because they seemed to come from within Germany itself. His superiors were skeptical. Could such deception work? Would German listeners be fooled? Was the risk of exposure worth the potential benefit? But Delmer was persistent and persuasive. In late 1941, he received authorization to establish an experimental black propaganda radio station. The project was classified as highly sensitive. Even most people within British intelligence did not know the details. Operational security was paramount, because if the deception was exposed, the entire operation would become worthless. Delmer assembled a team of German-speaking staff, many of them refugees and defectors, who brought authentic knowledge of German military culture, language, and psychology. He established broadcast facilities at secret locations in England, using powerful transmitters that could reach deep into German-controlled territory. And he began developing the format and content strategy that would make his black propaganda stations devastating psychological weapons. The first experiments. Delmer's first black propaganda station, launched in mid-1941, was called Gustav Siegfried I, Gustav Siegfried I. It claimed to be a clandestine station operated by a disgruntled member of the German officer corps who opposed the Nazi Party while supporting traditional German military values. The station broadcast a mix of authentic German military music, genuine news that could be verified through other sources, and inflammatory commentary criticizing Nazi leadership, party corruption, and strategic incompetence. The tone was patriotic German nationalism combined with anti-Nazi sentiment, a position that resonated with elements of the Wehrmacht who came from traditional military families and resented party interference in military affairs. Gustav Siegfried I achieved moderate success. German counterintelligence identified it as a British operation relatively quickly, but not before it had built an audience and demonstrated that black propaganda radio could be effective. More importantly, it provided Delmer and his team with operational experience and insights into what worked. Delmer learned several crucial lessons from this first experiment. The station needed better operational security to avoid identification. It required more authentic insider information to maintain credibility. And it needed to serve not just as propaganda, but as an intelligence operation, gathering information from German responses and using that information to refine its messaging. These lessons informed the creation of Soldatensender Calais, which would become Delmer's masterpiece and the black propaganda station Hitler would fear most.
Act 2. Soldatensender Calais, the station that shouldn't exist. The concept and launch. Soldatensender Calais launched in October 1943 at a critical moment in the war. German forces were reeling from defeats at Stalingrad and in North Africa. Allied bombing campaigns devastated German cities. The Eastern Front consumed men and materiel at unsustainable rates. Wehrmacht morale was declining, and divisions within the German military and political establishment were growing. Into this environment, Soldatensender Calais introduced itself as a radio station operated by German soldiers for German soldiers. Its stated purpose was to provide accurate information and entertainment to Wehrmacht personnel, cutting through official Nazi propaganda to tell soldiers the truth about the war situation. The station claimed to broadcast from Calais, France, a plausible location that was both within German-controlled territory and far enough from Berlin to suggest independence from party control. In reality, it broadcast from Aspidistra, a powerful transmitter station in England specifically built for black propaganda operations. The cover story was carefully constructed. Soldatensender Calais presented itself as operated by disgruntled but patriotic German officers who believed Nazi leadership was destroying Germany through incompetence, corruption, and ideological fanaticism. These fictional operators were loyal to Germany and the Wehrmacht, but opposed to the Nazi Party, a position that resonated with segments of the German officer corps who held similar views. The programming strategy. What made Soldatensender Calais so effective was not just what it said, but how it said it. The programming was designed to be authentic, entertaining, and subtly subversive. Music programming. The station played popular German music, including military marches, folk songs, and contemporary hits. This music was genuinely popular with German soldiers, making the station pleasant to listen to compared to heavy-handed official broadcasts. The music created familiarity and comfort, lowering listeners' psychological defenses. Between songs, announcers would make seemingly casual comments, sometimes patriotic, sometimes critical, always sounding like real soldiers talking amongst themselves. This casual, authentic tone made the station feel like a genuine military broadcast rather than formal propaganda. News coverage. Soldatensender Calais provided news about the war that mixed accurate reporting with strategic disinformation. The accurate reporting was crucial because it established credibility. When listeners could verify some stories through other sources or personal knowledge, they were more likely to trust the unverifiable stories, which were actually the propaganda elements. The station reported German victories when they occurred, but framed them in ways that emphasized the cost and questioned whether the victories advanced Germany's strategic position. It reported defeats honestly, but blamed them on Nazi leadership incompetence rather than Allied superiority, protecting German military pride while directing anger toward the party. Insider information. This was perhaps the station's most powerful element. Soldatensender Calais regularly mentioned specific military units, named particular officers, referenced internal Wehrmacht politics, and discussed events and controversies that were supposed to be secret. How did a supposedly clandestine German radio station know these details? This question haunted German counterintelligence. Were there actually dissident officers operating the station? Was Wehrmacht security compromised? The uncertainty created paranoia within the German military establishment. In reality, this information came from multiple British intelligence sources. Signals intelligence from Bletchley Park provided details from decoded German communications. Interrogations of German prisoners revealed military gossip and internal politics. Resistance networks in occupied territories observed and reported on German forces. All this intelligence was synthesized and incorporated into broadcasts in ways that suggested insider knowledge. Subversive commentary. Woven throughout the programming was subtle psychological warfare designed to undermine morale and cohesion. Announcers would make comments about black market corruption among Nazi officials, about party members avoiding frontline service while regular soldiers died, about strategic blunders by Hitler and his inner circle. These criticisms were never framed as enemy propaganda. They were presented as common knowledge among German soldiers, things everyone knew but could not openly discuss. This framing made them more believable and more corrosive to morale. The station also spread rumors designed to create suspicion and division. Stories about officers who had enriched themselves through corruption, suggestions that certain units received preferential treatment while others were sacrificed, insinuations about infighting among Nazi leadership. These rumors, whether true or false, created an atmosphere of distrust. The technical operation. Running Soldatensender Calais required sophisticated technical capabilities and meticulous operational security. The Aspidistra transmitter was one of the most powerful in Europe, capable of broadcasting with enough strength to reach across Germany and occupied territories. But power alone was not enough. The transmission had to appear to come from Calais, not England. British engineers achieved this through technical deception. They broadcast on frequencies close to those used by legitimate German military stations, creating confusion about the source. They timed transmissions to avoid periods when German direction-finding equipment could effectively triangulate the signal. They used atmospheric conditions that would make precise location difficult to determine. The broadcast facilities themselves were highly secure. Only cleared personnel had access. Scripts were classified. Even the fact that the operation was British was compartmentalized, with many staff members told they were working on intelligence analysis rather than propaganda production. Recording and production techniques were sophisticated for the era. Programs were pre-recorded with careful attention to audio quality, authentic sound effects, and seamless editing. Live broadcasts were occasionally mixed with recorded material to create variety and spontaneity. Voice talent was carefully selected. Announcers were German refugees or defectors who could speak with authentic regional accents. They were trained to adopt particular personas, fictional German soldiers with consistent personalities and backgrounds. Listeners came to recognize and trust these voices, not realizing they were carefully crafted characters. The intelligence integration. Soldatensender Calais was not just a propaganda operation. It was integrated with British intelligence collection and analysis in ways that made it both more effective as propaganda and more valuable as an intelligence asset. Intelligence-informed propaganda. Information from signals intelligence, prisoner interrogations, resistance reports, and other sources flowed to Soldatensender Calais writers and producers. This intelligence allowed them to reference specific events, name particular individuals, and discuss current controversies with insider accuracy that established credibility. Propaganda-generated intelligence. German reactions to Soldatensender Calais were monitored through signals intelligence. When German communications discussed or responded to content from the station, those intercepts revealed what topics were sensitive, what rumors were spreading, and how effective particular propaganda themes were. Sometimes German officers would reference Soldatensender Calais in communications that were intercepted and decoded, unknowingly confirming that they were listening and taking the content seriously. This feedback allowed continuous refinement of messaging and tactics.
Deception operations. Soldatensender Calais supported broader deception operations by spreading disinformation aligned with Allied strategic goals. Before D-Day, the station broadcast content reinforcing the fiction that the invasion would target Pas-de-Calais rather than Normandy. German intelligence officers monitoring the station might discount it as British propaganda, but the cumulative effect of multiple sources all suggesting the same deception contributed to German confusion. Resistance coordination. The station occasionally broadcast coded messages intended for resistance networks or Allied agents in occupied territory. These messages appeared to be innocuous content to casual listeners, but carried operational significance for those who knew the codes. This dual use made the broadcasts serve both propaganda and operational communication purposes simultaneously.
Act 3. The content, what made it so effective. The psychology of believability. Soldatensender Calais succeeded because it understood the psychology of its audience better than any other propaganda operation of the war. Delmer and his team crafted content that resonated with German soldiers' actual experiences, beliefs, and frustrations. Validation of existing doubts. By 1943 and 1944, many German soldiers privately doubted whether the war could be won. They saw the casualties mounting, the resources dwindling, the strategic situation deteriorating. But expressing these doubts was dangerous. Anyone questioning ultimate victory risked accusations of defeatism or treachery. Soldatensender Calais validated these suppressed doubts by voicing them. When the station's announcers expressed concerns about strategic direction or criticized incompetent leadership, soldiers listening felt their own unspoken thoughts being articulated. This validation was psychologically powerful because it made soldiers feel less alone in their doubts and more justified in their concerns. Protection of military honor. A crucial element of the station's effectiveness was that it never criticized German soldiers themselves. It always directed criticism at Nazi political leadership, party corruption, and strategic incompetence, while maintaining that German military personnel were brave, skilled, and honorable. This distinction allowed soldiers to maintain their professional pride and national identity while accepting the station's subversive messages. They could believe that Germany was losing not because German soldiers were inferior, but because Nazi leadership was failing them. This framing made the propaganda palatable to people who would have rejected direct attacks on Germany or its military. Insider authenticity. The station's use of authentic military terminology, correct unit designations, accurate references to events and people, and genuine understanding of military culture created an overwhelming impression of authenticity. When Soldatensender Calais discussed a particular division's recent operations, mentioned the specific general's command decisions, or referenced internal disputes within the Wehrmacht hierarchy, soldiers had no reason to doubt the station was what it claimed to be. The details were too accurate, too specific, too insider to be enemy propaganda. This authenticity extended to cultural references. The station understood German humor, used appropriate slang, referenced aspects of German popular culture, and demonstrated familiarity with daily life in ways that only someone immersed in German culture could manage. Specific content examples. While complete recordings of Soldatensender Calais broadcasts are limited, declassified documents and post-war accounts describe several types of content that were particularly effective. Officer corruption stories. The station regularly featured stories about Nazi party officials and senior officers enriching themselves while ordinary soldiers suffered. These stories described lavish lifestyles, black market profiteering, and nepotistic appointments.
Whether these specific stories were true or fabricated, they resonated because they confirmed suspicions many soldiers harbored about corruption within the regime. One recurring segment supposedly featured letters from soldiers describing encounters with corrupt officials. These letters were fictional but plausible, describing situations soldiers could easily imagine experiencing themselves. The station would read these letters with commentary expressing outrage at the corruption being described. Strategic criticism. Soldatensender Calais offered military analysis questioning strategic decisions made by Hitler and Nazi leadership. When German forces suffered defeats, the station would analyze what went wrong, often identifying genuine strategic errors, but always framing them as results of ideological interference in military planning rather than acknowledging Allied superiority. This analysis allowed soldiers to make sense of defeats in ways that protected their professional pride while undermining their confidence in Nazi leadership. The message was consistently that German military capability was being wasted through incompetent political direction. Rumors and gossip. The station spread rumors designed to create suspicion and division. Stories about impending leadership changes, suggestions that certain generals were in disfavor, insinuations about rivalries between different branches of the military or between Wehrmacht and SS forces. These rumors exploited real tensions within the German military and political establishment. Even when specific rumors were false, they felt plausible because they reflected genuine underlying conflicts. The cumulative effect was to create an atmosphere where distrust and uncertainty undermined cohesion. Personal warnings. Soldatensender Calais occasionally broadcast content that seemed to be warnings from fellow soldiers, alerts that certain units were being set up for particularly dangerous missions, suggestions that soldiers should protect themselves from being sacrificed by incompetent leadership, advice about how to survive in the deteriorating military situation. These warnings created paranoia about whether soldiers were being used as expendable pawns. They encouraged self-protective thinking over loyalty to mission and unit, subtly eroding military effectiveness. Entertainment with subversive elements. Music programming was interspersed with commentary that seemed casual but carried subversive messages. An announcer might introduce a popular song, then mention that its composer was Jewish and had fled Germany, subtly undermining racial propaganda. Or play a romantic song and comment that millions of German women were widows because of the war, implicitly questioning whether the sacrifice was worth it. These subtle elements were often more effective than direct propaganda because they seemed like offhand observations rather than deliberate messaging. Act 4. The German Response, Fear and Fury. Hitler's personal attention. Perhaps the clearest indication of Soldatensender Calais' effectiveness was the attention it received from Adolf Hitler himself. Multiple historical accounts document that Hitler personally discussed the station in military conferences and ordered its destruction. Why did the station concern Hitler so deeply? Because it represented a threat to military cohesion at a time when Germany desperately needed unified commitment to the war effort. Soldatensender Calais was undermining morale, spreading defeatism, and encouraging soldiers to question their leadership. Hitler recognized this as dangerous to his ability to continue the war. Hitler's orders to eliminate the station reflected both his fury at its existence and his understanding of its impact. But despite his personal attention and the resources devoted to countering it, German efforts to shut down Soldatensender Calais consistently failed.
Counterintelligence efforts. German counterintelligence devoted significant resources to investigating Soldatensender Calais. Multiple agencies pursued parallel efforts to identify its location, determine who operated it, and develop countermeasures. The Gestapo investigated whether there was actually a dissident group within the Wehrmacht broadcasting from Calais. They interrogated officers and soldiers, monitored communications, and conducted surveillance operations. These investigations found no evidence of such a group, because, of course, it did not exist. But the investigations themselves created additional paranoia and distrust within the German military, inadvertently serving Allied interests. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, focused on technical efforts to locate the transmitter. They used direction-finding equipment to triangulate the broadcast source. But British technical countermeasures made this difficult, and the power of the Aspidistra transmitter, combined with atmospheric conditions, created signals that appeared to come from various locations, including, plausibly, the Calais area. The Reichssicherheitshauptamt, the Reich Main Security Office, analyzed broadcast content looking for clues about who was creating it. They correctly identified that some information could only come from signals intelligence or other Allied sources, proving the station was not genuinely German. However, this discovery did not stop German soldiers from listening or believing the content. Competing propaganda. Unable to eliminate Soldatensender Calais, German authorities tried to counter it through their own propaganda. Official broadcasts warned soldiers that the station was British black propaganda designed to undermine morale. But these warnings often had the opposite effect, drawing attention to the station and prompting soldiers who had not yet heard it to seek it out. Some German propaganda efforts attempted to create mirror operations, stations that claimed to be British dissidents criticizing the Churchill government. These efforts were generally unsuccessful because they lacked the authenticity and insider knowledge that made Soldatensender Calais effective. Disciplinary measures. German military authorities made listening to Soldatensender Calais a punishable offense. Soldiers caught listening faced disciplinary action, in some cases execution for defeatism or listening to enemy propaganda. But enforcing this prohibition was nearly impossible. In barracks, bunkers, and field positions across occupied Europe and Germany itself, soldiers listened to the station in secret. The prohibition made listening an act of minor rebellion, which paradoxically made the station more attractive and the content more credible. If the authorities were so afraid of the station, perhaps it was telling truths they wanted hidden. The paranoia effect. Perhaps Soldatensender Calais' greatest achievement was not its direct propaganda impact, but the paranoia it created within the German military and intelligence establishment. The station's existence and content made German authorities suspect that their communications were compromised, that there were traitors within the Wehrmacht, that operational security was failing. These suspicions were partly correct. British intelligence did have multiple sources of information about German military affairs, but the paranoia exceeded the reality. German counterintelligence expanded investigations and security measures, consuming resources that could have been used for other purposes. Officers became more cautious in their communications, suspicious of their colleagues, and concerned about appearing disloyal. This atmosphere of distrust undermined military effectiveness independent of any specific propaganda impact. The station also created a dilemma for German authorities. Acknowledging its existence and warning against it drew attention and increased its audience. Ignoring it allowed the propaganda to spread unchallenged. Neither response was fully effective, leaving authorities in a no-win situation. Act 5. The Legacy. Lessons from the Shadows. Measuring the impact. Assessing Soldatensender Calais' actual effectiveness is challenging because propaganda impacts are inherently difficult to quantify. However, multiple indicators suggest the station achieved significant success. Audience size. German counterintelligence reports, intercepted and decoded by Allied signals intelligence, indicated that Soldatensender Calais reached substantial audiences within the Wehrmacht. While exact listener numbers are impossible to determine, the attention German authorities devoted to combating it suggests they believed the audience was large and the impact significant. Prisoner testimony. Interrogations of German prisoners revealed that many had heard Soldatensender Calais and that some took its content seriously. Prisoners sometimes referenced information they had heard on the station, indicating they remembered and believed it. Strategic impact. Post-war analyses credited Soldatensender Calais with contributing to the deterioration of German military morale in the final years of the war. While many factors contributed to this morale decline, black propaganda radio was recognized as playing a supporting role. The station's content reinforced doubts about Nazi leadership at a time when military setbacks were already creating questions about whether the war could be won. By providing what seemed like insider validation of these doubts, the station accelerated the psychological process of accepting defeat. Intelligence value. Beyond its propaganda impact, Soldatensender Calais generated intelligence through German responses. Monitoring which topics prompted reactions, what information German authorities tried to suppress, and how they attempted to counter the station provided insights into German strategic thinking and operational security concerns. The Cold War evolution. Soldatensender Calais ended when World War II ended, but its techniques and principles evolved into Cold War information warfare. Both Western and Soviet intelligence services operated clandestine radio stations during the Cold War. The CIA supported Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, which broadcast to communist countries. While these were officially independent, they received covert government funding and served intelligence purposes alongside their public broadcasting roles. The Soviet Union and its allies operated radio stations targeting Western audiences, some openly acknowledging their communist affiliations, others presenting themselves as independent voices or dissident groups within Western societies. These Cold War operations learned from World War II black propaganda. They understood the importance of authenticity, the value of mixing truth with strategic messaging, and the power of appearing to come from within the target society rather than from external enemies.
Modern information warfare. Today's information warfare uses digital platforms rather than radio broadcasts, but the fundamental principles pioneered by operations like Soldatensender Calais remain relevant. Modern influence operations create fake personas on social media that claim to be members of target communities. These personas gain credibility by posting a mix of genuine content and strategic disinformation, just as Soldatensender Calais mixed accurate news with propaganda. State-sponsored influence campaigns operate fake news websites and social media accounts that pretend to be independent sources, but actually serve intelligence and propaganda purposes. The deception about source and motive echoes black propaganda techniques. The challenge of identifying and countering these operations parallels what German authorities faced with Soldatensender Calais. When the source is deliberately deceptive and the content mixes truth with lies, determining what is authentic becomes extremely difficult. The ethical questions. Soldatensender Calais raises ethical questions that remain relevant today. Was it justified to engage in systematic deception, even against an enemy engaged in genocide and aggressive warfare? Does the context of total war against Nazi Germany provide sufficient moral justification for black propaganda techniques that might be troubling in other contexts? These questions lack simple answers.
The operation certainly contributed to defeating a regime that represented an existential threat to human freedom and perpetrated unprecedented atrocities. From that perspective, aggressive psychological warfare seems not just justified, but necessary. Yet, the techniques involved deliberate, sustained deception on a massive scale. They exploited psychological vulnerabilities, spread false information, and contributed to an information environment where truth became difficult to discern. These methods, if normalized or employed without strict ethical oversight, pose risks to open societies and honest discourse. Modern democracies grappling with information warfare face similar dilemmas. When is strategic deception justified? What ethical limits should constrain intelligence and military information operations? How should societies balance operational effectiveness against commitments to truth and transparency? World War II operations like Soldatensender Calais provide historical context for these debates, but not definitive answers. The ethical questions remain contested and complex. Conclusion. The voice in the shadows. Decoding the full operation. So we return to our opening scene, a German soldier listening to a radio station that should not exist, hearing truths mixed with lies in a voice that sounds like his own. Now we understand the full reality. Soldatensender Calais was one of the most sophisticated psychological warfare operations of World War II. It combined technical innovation, deep cultural knowledge, intelligence integration, and psychological insight to create a propaganda weapon that undermined enemy morale from within. The station succeeded not through obvious persuasion, but through subtle manipulation. It validated doubts, protected pride, exploited divisions, and spread paranoia while maintaining a facade of authenticity that made its messages believable in ways open propaganda never could. Adolf Hitler feared this station because he understood its power. It represented a threat he could not effectively counter. He could not eliminate it physically. He could not discredit it credibly. He could not prevent soldiers from listening. And he could not stop its messages from spreading through word of mouth, even among soldiers who never heard the broadcasts themselves. At Cipher Tales, we decode operations where propaganda and espionage merged into integrated intelligence warfare. Soldatensender Calais exemplifies this integration perfectly. It appeared to be a radio station, a simple propaganda broadcast, but it was actually a complex intelligence operation that gathered information through German responses, supported strategic deception campaigns, communicated with agents and resistance networks, and achieved psychological effects far beyond what its content alone would suggest. The station operated in the shadows between truth and lies, between German authenticity and British manipulation. It succeeded because it understood that the most effective propaganda often comes disguised as something else entirely. The techniques pioneered by Sefton Delmer and Soldatensender Calais echo through modern information warfare. Every time we encounter information sources that seem authentic but may be deliberately deceptive, every time influence operations exploit our psychological vulnerabilities, every time the line between truth and strategic messaging becomes blurred, we see the legacy of World War II black propaganda. In our next upload on Cipher Tales, we are decoding the spy who forged Hitler's signature to save lives. You will discover how Allied intelligence created documents so perfect they fooled Nazi bureaucracy itself. If this deep dive into the British black propaganda station Hitler feared most captivated you, please subscribe to Cipher Tales for more decoded mysteries from the hidden history of World War II. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. Like this video if you found it revealing and thought-provoking. Every like helps us reach more people who appreciate the complex, hidden dimensions of history. Comment below and tell us, were you surprised by how sophisticated World War II's psychological warfare was? Do you see connections to modern information warfare techniques? What other World War II propaganda and espionage intersections should we decode next? Share this video with anyone fascinated by psychological warfare, intelligence operations, or the hidden history of how minds were shaped during the world's greatest conflict. Until then, remember, the most dangerous voices are often those that sound most like our own. This has been Cipher Tales. Keep questioning, keep decoding, keep discovering the secrets that changed history.